Hey guys, my name is Joe Proulx, and welcome to Joe Proulx Music Reviews. We Are the City is a Vancouver-based indie pop, art pop band comprised of Kane McKenzie on keyboards and vocals, Andrew Hukuliak on drums, and David Menzel on the guitar. The band, however, did not really get noticed outside of the Canadian indie scene until they re-released, I should say, their 2013 record titled Violent. In the US and in Europe, they got signed on to a couple of different record labels, was able to put out this record worldwide. And I had heard the record in 2013 when it came out originally in Canada. It was my favorite record of 2013, so you might guess that I kind of liked it. I actually loved it. And actually, I had heard of the band earlier when they had released the 2011 EP titled High School, which was, I thought was a brilliant little EP, and it made me go check out their debut album, which was released in 2009, titled In a Quiet World, which is still a Canada-only release. And these guys, on their early records, really resembled like a early Coldplay, very piano-driven kind of indie rock music. However, the song structures and their lyrics at times could be really weird, experimental, abstract. And while the music, I think, on that High School EP is a little bit more concise and more poppy in structure and in some of the melodies than on that debut album, it was still, I think, the band progressing in a way. And when they put out Violent in 2013, it showed the band really stepping up their game instrumentally with just more, more sounds, way more synthesizers of different shapes and sizes. Sometimes they were just really distorted and abrasive and noisy. They also incorporated some strings more into their sound a little bit. Sort of like sampling strings, I guess, and then like kind of looping them weirdly to kind of create kind of auras of ambiance. If you listen to that record on a couple tracks, you'll kind of hear that kind of effect going on. And it was just a very colorful record, and not only was it colorful instrumentally, but I thought that lyrically it was a pretty interesting record too, sort of diving into things like religion and having a kind of bad relationship or a kind of confusing relationship with religion, specifically Christianity. And when these guys re-released that 2013 album, which was my favorite album that year, it really made me love the band. I was just kind of disappointed, mostly because I was really hoping for some new music, not just a re-release of their album I had already loved. I mean, I still loved their record, but it was just kind of, after 2 years, all they've done is kind of re-release the album with a couple of extra bonus tracks, which were good, but they were only like 2 bonus tracks. I mean, it's not a ton of music. Plus, they were touring a bunch in Europe, and they had this movie that still hasn't been released to the public. I'm waiting to see this movie. Still have not seen it. I was really wondering what the band was going to do next, considering all this kind of attention they have started getting worldwide. However, they just a little bit earlier this year, started hinting towards some new music, sort of hinting towards a new single that dropped sometime in September, titled Keep On Dancing, which appears on this album over here, Above Club. And I listened to it, as well as later, just before this, about like a couple weeks before this album came out, they put out another single titled Kiss Me Honey. And both of these singles were like the poppiest singles that these guys have ever put out. Though they are poppy in the sense that it is We Are the City, it is still weird. It is still abstract. Like, I think the song Keep On Dancing, the lead single from this record, really reminds me of like some Animal Collective, especially in like the beat and the very echoey vocals. The beat on this track is awesome, and it's a pretty catchy song through and throughout. I think it's one of the most concise tunes that these guys have ever put out. It's got these really kind of bubbly, weird keyboards in the background, and it sounds like maybe like a vibraphone or a xylophone just plinking away at certain points in this track, and maybe some guitar in there too. It's a pretty atmospheric track in a way, though it does have that beat banging away for the entirety of the track. It is live drumming, it sounds fantastic again, and it's just a well put together tune. I really liked it. And the track Kiss Me Honey was really like synth poppy, like it sounded like Capital Cities if they were a little bit more dirty with their production. And I really liked that tune too. I especially liked the, not the radio edit, but the album version of the track, which has a pretty nice build up in the bridge that I really like. And it's actually the closer on this record, and while it is not a very long song, I mean, like, none of the tracks on here are all that long. I mean, like, the longest track on this album is like just over 3.5 minutes. Like, it's not that long of an album at all. So you can't really fault it for that. And it's a good tune. It's a pretty epic song to end out the album. But I feel like these two singles kind of gave a false impression of what this album was going to be like. Based on these two singles being really poppy and really accessible and really kind of instantaneous, I was kind of expecting a more accessible We Are the City record, which would make sense because these guys are a pop group. Though they are a art pop group or an experimental pop group, they are a pop group, and I wouldn't mind them getting a little accessible. That was cool with me, considering these two tracks. That's what I was expecting, but that's not necessarily what we get on this record, actually. This is actually, I think, weirder than their debut. Their debut was definitely not that adventurous instrumentally, but in like weird song structures, yeah, it was pretty whacked out. And Violent was actually, I think, a great kind of middle ground in between this kind of weird experimental side of them in their songs and this concise side of them. But on this album, we get way more of the weird side of them with these kind of bigger, kind of with this kind of synthesizer thing that they've had on Violent piled on top of it. This album is 8 tracks, as I said earlier. It is only 25 minutes long. It is a short record, and it is one of the weirdest pop albums I've heard this year. And it's really just because of the weird production on this thing. This is We Are the City's first try at self-producing an album, which, you know, it's kind of a hit or miss thing whenever bands do that, especially after they've kind of never done that before. They've kind of just always worked with a producer in the studio. When they're recording an album, they really don't have any experience with putting together an actual full-length album that's going to be released to a lot of people, and they're producing it by themselves. Sometimes these projects can go awry, and it really gives this album noisier sound, even though maybe Violent wasn't, I don't know, cleaned up and proper, or I don't know what the thing is for proper. There we go, proper. Violent wasn't exactly cleaned up, but it looks like really cleaned up compared to this record. This record is way more noisy. It's not too noisy. It kind of just, it's a little bit away from being a little lo-fi. And maybe for some, at first, if they listen to some of the songs on the back end of this record, they're going to think this is a freaking weird band, and they're not going to listen to it. But luckily, I feel like the band does, I think, reel people in with the first 3 songs on this record, which are kind of poppy. They are very memorable on first listen, though they are still very kind of weird and produced kind of oddly. The opening track on here, Take Your Picture With Me While You Still Can, actually starts out as a bit of a ballad, actually, with after these kind of weird, like, thin atmospheric synths sort of kick the track off. We kind of get these slow drums and these kind of emotionally charged, but still kind of lo-fi and all mixed in the right ear channel, as well as the drums mixed all in the left ear channel, just kind of plodding away, while Kay McKenzie, in his usual mid to high register voice, just kind of vocalizes over top of it. But then the band just brings in this heavy beat with big old kick drums and a pretty awesome little synth lead, and then this track turns really catchy. The only thing that I think could but it made this track a little bit better was that there was just like a really nice bass line on this track. Though it is still really danceable, it is still really fun. I'm just kind of throwing around ideas because this is a pretty good way to kick off the record, and I feel like it keeps going fairly strong with the song Heavy as a Brick, which does have a pretty catchy refrain as well, though other than that chorus, which is actually pretty awesome, it's just kind of an underwhelming track. It's not a bad track by any means, it's just not blowing me away as much as some other tracks on here, which I will get to later. And then we get the track Keep on Dancing, which I love. It just keeps growing on me with each listen. But then we get the track Sign My Name Like Queen, which is maybe the worst track on this record. It's the shortest track on here, and it really just feels like a weird idea that the band really didn't do a good job of developing. Though I do like the nice synth lead that comes in, which I really like the melody of that synth lead, and I like the kind of swagger filled kind of vocals that Kane is doing on this track. The way he's delivering them is kind of weird for him, but it's just not all that great of a track, and it does have a kind of bleh kind of ending to it as well, which is kind of disappointing. But I think that when we get into the second half of this record, the last 4 tracks of this record, the album gets really weird and experimental, and I dig this second half of the record a lot more than the first half, because the songs are just so much more interesting. The track Club Music actually is kind of concise in a way. I think in structure maybe it's a little concise, I guess. It's got weird different phases to it, though it does come back to this really whacked out refrain, which gets even more whacked out at the end of the song, when Kim McKenzie is like giving one of his most weird vocal performances ever. It's got these really weird synthesizers and this really tittering beat and drum beat from Andrew Kuliak. It's one of the weirdest tracks on here. It kind of reminds me a bit of the Animal Collective again, but it seems like We Are the City's kind of taking that Animal Collective influence that I think is really showing through on this record at a lot of points, and then sort of making it their own, kind of melding it into their own style, if you know what I mean. We get the track Check Room, which is I think the longest song on here, and this track I love. The way it starts out is a beautiful opening to this track with just some nice piano chords and a really nice refrain, a beautiful melody on this track, and I love the weird change-up where we kind of get like a dream pop feel on the refrain that happens for most of this track. Everybody told me that. It's got these like really atmospheric, dramatic synths and this beautiful vocalizing from Kane McKenzie. It's a pretty solid tune. It's not my favorite on here. That goes probably to Keep on Dancing, or maybe to the next track on here, Lovers and All Things, which has a great chord progression, and it's one of the moments on here where the band really brings in some weird musical influences, and I think it happens on a few other tracks on here where they go for these like breakdowns with these really very quick, heavy drum beats, and it really, at points, because of the weird production and the weird kind of cuts and then like some weird sound effect plays or something like that, it really reminds me of like glitch hop or something like that. It's really out there for We Are the City compared to what they were doing on their last record, and I feel like maybe people who really like the rock vibe of some of the tracks of Violent are not going to like this record just because it is so kind of poppy and electronic-y and really weird. But I kind of like the direction that these guys are going in. I think it really appealed to me right away, unlike the direction that Tame Impala went on their new record, Currents. Though that record has grown on me quite a bit after I didn't really like the direction that they took with that record, or Kevin Parker took with that record initially. It has grown on me. In this record, I think it kind of prepped me for this record, which is, again, really synthetic, lots of synths, and really heavy drumming on these tracks. And I feel like it turns into one of the best records of the year that I've heard. I really like this thing. If there were any gripes I had with this record, I think, number one, it's too short. It's just a short record. It is really, really. It feels like it should be longer than it is. Um, though they do come up with a lot of great ideas in these 25 minutes, I still feel like they should have done some more stuff on here. I mean, I've waited 2 years and then they give us like basically an EP, but they call it an album. It's kind of disappointing in a little, just a little bit. I think just at some point the production quality and the production choices and some of the weird segues into some parts on this album and some of the tracks are kind of awkward and just not executed all that well. And I wish that maybe these tracks flowed a little bit better, like as good as they did on Violent. And I don't think this album is as good as Violent. Violent is nearly a perfect out for me. But this record is still really intriguing. It is still really interesting to listen to. There are catchy songs on here. There are weird, experimental, weird, out there songs on here. And there are beautiful moments on here. I feel like the band still has a lot from that Violent record. Just at their core, they still are that kind of a band, though they kind of done something a little bit out of their comfort zone. Especially Kay McKenzie with some of his vocals on this album. I feel like he goes outside of his comfort zone a little bit. And I feel like the band did something on here, the way they promoted this album, the way that this album came about. I feel like they really wanted to do something different, and I feel like they've done that on this record. And not only have they done something different, then that's great for them, but it's great for us, because I feel like they've come out with an experiment that's really worthwhile and really worth listening to, and I thank them for that. I hope that they continue to experiment and see what they can come up with on later records. So I have to say that I'm really digging this record. It's definitely going to be one of my favorites of the year. And yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about this record. I'm really loving it. Thank you, We Are the City. I love y'all. I can't wait till you come to Winnipeg. Please come to Winnipeg. Please. Please. My score, my favorite tracks, and my least favorite tracks off this record are going to be in the description. If you want to check out this record, I'm going to put a link in the description to the streaming of this record as I'm recording this review. The album's not out yet. I've been streaming it, and that's how I've been listening to it. I've been streaming it on xflame.ca. Again, the link to that stream will be in the description. Go check out this record if you want to. Have you guys listened to this album? Have you listened to any of the singles? What did you think of it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? I can see some fans of their previous work maybe not liking this. I'm loving this thing quite a bit. I don't think it's as good as Violent, but I do think it's very close. I think if maybe they cleaned up a couple tracks on here, made them a little bit more smoother, just in the transitions, and maybe the track Sign My Name Like Queen was a little more interesting. I feel like this album could have been really amazing. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. My name is Joe Proulx, and I am out.